No one expected Jamie Dornan to be the reason millions of fans would suddenly break down in tears, especially not from something that had nothing to do with a script, a character, or a movie scene. But when a short clip of him surfaced online, raw and completely unfiltered, it spread with a speed that no PR team could have planned, and what people saw in that moment felt almost too real to be part of the polished world he usually lives in. It began with what seemed like an ordinary public appearance, the kind Jamie has done countless times throughout his career. There were cameras, interviews, flashes of light, nothing unusual for someone who has spent years navigating fame with quiet control. But then, in the middle of what should have been just another routine interaction, something shifted in a way no one saw coming. As he was asked a seemingly simple question, one that should have led to a quick, rehearsed answer, Jamie paused. Not the kind of pause actors use for effect, but a genuine hesitation, as if the words caught somewhere deeper than expected. His expression changed subtly at first, but within seconds, it became clear that whatever he was about to say wasn't part of any script. What followed was a moment that fans would replay over and over again. Jamie's voice softened, almost breaking, as he began to speak about something personal, something he had rarely, if ever, addressed so openly before. He didn't dive into dramatic detail, he didn't try to create a scene, but that restraint is exactly what made it so powerful. It felt like watching someone lose control in the most quiet, human way possible. The contrast was impossible to ignore. This was the same Jamie Dornan known for his composed, sometimes distant public image, a man who had built a reputation for keeping his private life carefully protected. And yet here he was, standing in front of cameras, allowing a glimpse of vulnerability that felt almost accidental, as if it slipped out before he had the chance to stop it. Within hours, the clip began circulating across social media, and the reaction was immediate. Fans who had followed him for years admitted they had never seen him like this before. Comments flooded in, many of them expressing shock, others describing how unexpectedly emotional the moment felt. Some said they didn't even understand why they were crying, only that something about his voice, his expression, the way he struggled to hold himself together, made it impossible not to feel it. As people watched more closely, they began to notice the details that made the moment so unforgettable. The slight tremble in his voice, the way his eyes seemed to drift for a second as if searching for something to hold onto, the quiet exhale before he continued speaking. These weren't dramatic gestures, but they carried a weight that felt deeply personal, almost as if the audience had witnessed something they weren't meant to see. Speculation quickly followed, as it always does. What exactly had triggered that reaction? Was it a memory, a loss, a question that hit too close to something he had been holding in for years? Some pointed to past interviews where Jamie had briefly mentioned the challenges of balancing fame with personal life, while others connected it to moments in his career that may have carried more emotional weight than the public realized. But what truly made the moment resonate wasn't the search for answers, it was the feeling it created. For once, Jamie wasn't playing a role, wasn't delivering lines crafted for impact. He was simply present, unguarded, and that authenticity cut through everything else. In an industry built on illusion, that kind of raw honesty stands out in a way that's almost impossible to ignore. There was one line in particular that people kept coming back to. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it carried a quiet intensity that lingered long after the clip ended. He spoke about how some things stay with you, no matter how much time passes, and the way he said it made it clear that he wasn't just speaking in general terms. It felt personal, specific, and unresolved. By the time the video had reached millions of views, it had already become more than just a viral moment. It turned into something people connected with on a deeper level, not because of what was fully explained, but because of what wasn't. The lack of clarity, the unfinished nature of his words, made it feel real in a way that polished interviews rarely do. And that's what made fans cry, not just the vulnerability itself, but the realization that behind the controlled image, there was a story that hadn't been fully told. A story hinted at in a single moment, in a voice that almost broke, leaving everyone with the same lingering question: what was it that Jamie Dornan was really holding back? As the emotional clip continued to circulate, something deeper began to emerge, not just curiosity about what happened in that moment, but a growing realization that the reason it affected so many people had less to do with the event itself, and more to do with what it revealed about Jamie Dornan as a person. Because when the noise of speculation started to fade, what remained was a quiet, undeniable truth. That moment wasn't sudden, it was built on something that had been there all along. For years, Jamie has maintained a carefully balanced image, present enough to stay connected with fans, yet distant enough to protect what truly matters to him. Unlike many in Hollywood, he rarely overshares, rarely turns his personal life into headlines, and almost never allows emotions to take center stage in public. That restraint, while admirable, also created a version of him that people thought they understood, but perhaps never fully did. When he spoke in that moment, even briefly, it felt like that boundary had shifted. Not dramatically, not in a way that exposed everything, but just enough to reveal that behind the calm, composed exterior, there was a depth of experience that had never been fully acknowledged. And for many fans, that realization was more powerful than any explanation could have been. Some began to look back at his journey with a different perspective. The pressures of stepping into a global spotlight with 50 Shades of Grey, the scrutiny that came with such a controversial role, and the constant need to navigate public opinion while maintaining a private identity, all of it suddenly felt heavier. What once seemed like confidence or detachment could now be seen as something else entirely, a form of protection. There's also the reality that not all emotional weight comes from one defining event. Sometimes, it's the accumulation of experiences, the quiet moments, the things that are never spoken about openly, that shape how someone reacts when they're finally caught off guard. Jamie's reaction didn't feel like a performance, and that's exactly why it resonated. It felt like something that had been building beneath the surface for a long time. Fans, in turn, began to respond not just with sympathy, but with a kind of understanding that hadn't been there before. Many admitted that they had underestimated him, that they had only seen fragments of who he really was. The moment didn't just make them emotional, it made them reconsider everything they thought they knew about him. What's particularly striking is that Jamie never followed up with a detailed explanation. He didn't return to clarify his words, didn't expand on the emotions he briefly revealed, and didn't attempt to reshape the narrative. And in a way, that silence became part of the story itself. It suggested that whatever he felt in that moment wasn't meant to be dissected or explained, it simply existed, raw and unfiltered, for those who witnessed it. This absence of closure is what gives the moment its lasting impact. Instead of offering answers, it leaves space for interpretation, for connection, for reflection. People don't just watch it, they feel it, often projecting their own experiences onto something that was never fully defined. And that's what turns a fleeting moment into something that stays with you. By the end of it all, the real story isn't about a single emotional reaction captured on camera. It's about the quiet complexity of a person who has spent years being seen, yet not entirely understood. It's about how one unguarded moment can shift perception in a way no carefully crafted statement ever could. And maybe that's why it made fans cry. Not because they finally learned the full truth, but because they realized there was a truth there all along, hidden in plain sight, waiting for just one moment to be felt rather than explained. And maybe that's why it made fans cry, not because they finally learned the full truth, but because they realized there was a truth there all along, hidden in plain sight, waiting for just one moment to be felt rather than explained. And maybe that's why it made fans cry, not because they finally learned the full truth, but because they realized there was a truth there all along, hidden in